Today we're going to be reading chapters 15 to 21. Final video of Judges. Already done within like 3 days. That's crazy. But it was a really good book. I love Judges. I think I wouldn't put it in my top 10, but I put it in my top 20 for sure. So, let's get right into it. Probably, let's see, of the Old Testament now. Ecclesiastes, Numbers, or Deuteronomy, and then Numbers, Joshua. I say out of the Old Testament, I put it my 8th favorite, Judges. Anyway, let's go. Later on, at the time of wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat and went to visit his wife. He said, "I'm going to my wife's room," but her father would not let him go in. "I was so sure you hated her," he said, "that I gave her to your companion. Isn't her younger sister more attractive? Take her instead." Samson said to them, "This time I have a right to get even with the Philistines. I will really harm them." So he went out and caught 300 foxes and tied them tail to tail in pairs. He then fastened a torch to every pair of tails, lit the torches, and let the foxes loose in the standing grain of the Philistines. He burned up the shocks and standing grain together with the vineyards and olive groves. When the Philistines asked who did this, they were told, "Samson, the Timnite's son-in-law," because his wife was given to his companion. So the Philistines went up and burned her and her father to death. Samson said to them, "Since you've acted like this, I swear that I won't stop until I get my revenge on you." He attacked them viciously and slaughtered many of them. Then he went down and stayed in a cave in the rock of Etam. The Philistines went up and camped in Judah, spreading out near Lehi. The people of Judah asked, "Why have you come to fight us?" "We have come to take Samson prisoner," they answered, "to do to him as he did to us." Then 3,000 men from Judah went down to the cave in the rock of Etam and said to Samson, "Don't you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us? What have you done to us?" He answered, "I merely did to them what they did to me." They said to him, "We've come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines." Samson said, "Swear to me that you won't kill me yourselves." "Agreed," they answered. "We will only tie you up and hand you over to them. We will not kill you." So they bound him with 2 new ropes and led him up from the rock. As he approached Lehi, the Philistines came towards him, shouting. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. The ropes on his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hands. Finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. Then Samson said, "With a donkey's jawbone I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone I have killed 1,000 men." When he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone, and the place was called Ramath-Lehi. Because he was very thirsty, he cried out to the Lord, "You have given your servant this great victory. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" Then God opened up the hollow place in Lehi, and water came out of it. When Samson drank, his strength returned, and he revived. So the spring was called En Hakor, and is still there in Lehi. Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. One day, Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute. He went in to spend the night with her. The people of Gaza were told, "Samson is here." So they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the city gate. They made no move during the night, saying, "At dawn we'll kill him." But Samson lay there only until the middle of the night. Then he got up and took hold of the doors of the city gate together with the 2 posts and tore them loose. Bar and all, he lifted them to his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. Some time later, he found love with a woman in the valley of Sarek, whose name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, "See if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him, so we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued." Samson answered her, "If anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I'll become as weak as any other man." Then the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she tied him with them. With men hidden in the room, she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the bowstrings as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to a flame, so that the secret of his strength was not discovered. Then Delilah said to Samson, "You have made a fool of me. You lied to me. Come now, tell me how you can be tied." He said, "If anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I'll become as weak as any other man." So Delilah took new ropes and tightened with them. Then, with men hidden in the room, she called to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. But he snapped the ropes off his arms as if they were threads. Delilah said to Samson, all this time you have been making a fool of me and lying to me. Tell me how you can be tied. He replied, if you weave the 7 braids of my head into the fabric on the loom and tighten it with the pin, I'll become as weak as any other man. So while he was sleeping, Delilah took the 7 braids of his head, wove them into the fabric, and tightened it with the pin. Again she called to them, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He awoke from his sleep and pulled up the pin in the loom with the fabric. Then she said to him, how can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you have made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength. With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. So he told her everything. No razor has ever been used on my head, he said, because I have been a Nazarite, dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head was shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man. When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, come back once more, he has told me everything. So the rulers of the Philistines returned with the silver in their hands. After putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Then she called, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He awoke from his sleep and thought, I'll go out as before and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. Then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding grain in the prison. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate, saying, our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands. When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, our God has delivered our enemy to our hands, the one who laid waste our land and multiplied our slain. While they were in high spirits, they shouted, bring out Samson to entertain us. So they called Samson out of the prison, and he performed for them. When they stood him among the pillars, Samson said to the servant who held his hand, put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so that I may lean against them. Now the temple was crowded with men and women. All the rulers of the Philistines were there, and on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, Sovereign Lord, remember me, please. God, strengthen me just once more, and let me, with one blow, get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Then Samson reached toward the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood, bracing himself against them, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other. Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. Then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he did than while he lived. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. Then his brothers and his father's whole family went down to get him. They brought him back and buried him between Zorah and Eshtal in the tomb of Manoah, his father. He had led Israel 20 years. Now a man named Micah from the hill country of Ephraim said to his mother, the 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you, and about which I heard you utter a curse, I have that silver with me. I took it. Then his mother said, the Lord bless you, my son. When he returned the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother, she said, I solemnly consecrate my silver to the Lord for my son to make an image overlaid with silver. I will give it back to you. So after he returned the silver to his mother, she took 200 shekels of silver and gave them to a silversmith who used them to make the idol, and it was put in Micah's house. Now this man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and some household gods, and installed one of his sons as his priest. In those In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. A young Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, who had been living with the clan of Judah, left that town in search of some other place to stay. On his way, he came to Micah's house in the hill country of Ephraim. Micah asked him, where are you from? I'm a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, he said, and I'm looking for a place to stay. Then Micah said to him, live with me and be my father and priest, and I'll give you the 10 shekels of silver a year, your clothes and your food. So the Levite agreed to live with him, and the young man became like one of his sons to him. Then Micah installed the Levite, and the young man became his priest and lived in his house. And Micah said, Now I know that the Lord will be good to me, since this Levite has become my priest. All right. In those days, Israel had no king, and in those days, the tribe of the Danites was seeking a place of their own where they might settle, because they had not yet come into an inheritance. So Israel, no, wait. Because they had not yet come into an inheritance among the tribes of Israel. So the Danites sent 5 of their leading men from Zorah and Eshtal to spy out the land and explore it. These men represented all the Danites. They told them, "Go explore the land." So they entered the hill country of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah, where they spent the night. When they were near Micah's house, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. So they turned in there and asked him, "Who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? Why are you here?" He told them what Micah had done for him, and said, "He has hired me, and I am his priest." Then they said to him, "Please inquire of God to learn whether our journey will be successful." The priest answered them, "Go in peace. Your journey has the Lord's approval." So the 5 men left and came to Laish, where they saw that the people were living in safety like the Sidonians, at peace and secure. And since their land lacked nothing, they were prosperous. Also, they lived a long way from the Sidonians and had no relationship with everyone else. When they returned to Zorah and Eshtal, their fellow Danites asked them, "How did you find things?" They answered, "Come on, let's attack them. We have seen the land, and it's very good. Aren't you going to do something? Don't hesitate to go there and take it over. When you get there, you will find an unsuspected people in a spacious land that God has put into your hands, a land that lacks nothing whatever." Then 600 men of the Danites, armed for battle, set out from Zorah and Eshtal. On the way, they set up camp near Kiriath Jearim in Judah. This is why the place west of Kiriath Jearim is called Mahanadan to this day. From there, they went on to the hill country of Ephraim and came to Micah's house. Then the 5 men who had spied out the land of Laish said to their fellow Danites, "Do you know that one of these houses has an ephod, some household gods, and an image overlaid with silver? Now you know what to do." So they turned in there and went to the house of the young Levite at Micah's place and greeted him. The 600 Danites armed for battle stood at the entrance of the gate. The 5 men who had spied out the land went inside and took the idol, the ephod, and the household gods, while the priests and the 600 armed men stood at the entrance of the gate. And the 5 men went into Micah's house and took the idol, the ephod, and the house of gods. The priest said to them, "What are you doing?" They answered him, "Be quiet, don't say a word. Come with us and be our father and priest. Isn't it better that you serve a tribe and clan in Israel as priests rather than just one man's household?" The priest was very pleased. He took the ephod, the household gods, and the idol and went along with the people. Putting their little children, their livestock, and their possessions in front of them, they turned away and left. When they had gone some distance from Micah's house, the men who lived near Micah were called together and overtook the Danites. As they shouted after them, the Danites turned and said to Micah, "What's the matter with you that you called out your men to fight?" He replied, "You took the gods I made and my priests and went away. What else do I have? How can you ask, 'What's the matter with you?'" The Danites answered, "Don't argue with us, or some of the men may get angry and attack you, and your family will lose your lives." So the Danites went their way, and Micah, seeing that they were too strong for him, turned around and went back home. Then they took what Micah had made and his priests and went on to Laish against a people at peace and secure. They attacked them with the sword and burned down their city. There was no one to rescue them because they lived a long way from Sidon and had no relationship with anyone else. The city was in a valley near Beth Rahab. The Danites rebuilt this city and settled there. They named it Dan, after the ancestor Dan, who was born to Israel, though the city used to be called Laish. There the Danites set up for themselves the idol, and Jonathan, son of Gershom, the son of Moses, and his sons were priests for the tribe of Dan until the time of the captivity of the land. They continued to use the idol Micah had made all the time the house of God was in Shiloh. In those days, Israel had no king. Now, a Levite who lived in a remote area in the hill country of Ephraim took a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. but she was unfaithful to him. She left him and went back to her parents' home in Bethlehem, Judah. After she had been there 4 months, her husband went to her to persuade her to return. He had with him his servant and 2 donkeys. She took him into her parents' home, and when her father saw him, he gladly welcomed him. His father-in-law, the woman's father, prevailed on him to stay, so he remained with him 3 days, eating and drinking and sleeping there. On the 4th day, they got up early, and he prepared to leave. But the woman's father said to his son-in-law, "Refresh yourself with something to eat, then you can go." So the 2 of them sat down to eat and drink together. Afterward, the woman's father said, "Please stay tonight and enjoy yourself." And when the man got up to go, his father-in-law persuaded him. So he stayed there that night. On the morning of the 5th day, when he rose to go, the woman's father said, "Refresh yourself, wait till afternoon." So the 2 of them ate together. Then, when the man with his concubine and his servant got up to leave, his father-in-law, the woman's father, said, "Now look, it's almost evening. Spend the night here. The day is nearly over. Stay and enjoy yourself. Early tomorrow morning, you can get up and be on your way home." But unwilling to stay another night, the man left and went toward Jabes, that is Jerusalem, with his 2 saddled donkeys and his concubine. When they were near Jabes, and the day was almost gone, the servant said to his master, "Come, let's stop at this city of the Jebusites and spend the night." His master replied, "No, we won't go into any city whose people are not Israelites. We will go on to Gibeah," he added. "Come, let's try to reach Gibeah or Ramah, and spend the night in one of those places." So they went on, and the sun set as they neared Gibeah in Benjamin. There they stopped to spend the night. They went and sat in the city square, but no one took them in for the night. That evening an old man from the hill country of Ephraim, who was living in Gibeah, the inhabitants of the place were Benjamites, came in from his work in the fields. When he looked and saw the traveler in the city square, the old man asked, "Where are you going? Where did you come from?" He answered, "We are on our way from Bethlehem in Judah to a remote area in the hill country of Ephraim where I live. I have been to Bethlehem in Judah, and now I am going to the house of the Lord. No one has taken me in for the night. We have both straw and fodder for our donkeys, and bread and wine for ourselves, your servants, me, the woman, and the young man with us. We don't need anything." "You are welcome at my house," the old man said. "Let me supply whatever you need, only don't spend the night in the square." So he took him into his house and fed his donkeys. After they had washed their feet, they had something to eat and drink. I think it's about to get a little Sodom and Gomorrah here in a moment. Hold on. Oh, it's coughing. Yeah, it's about to give a Sodom and Gomorrah vibes in a moment. While they were enjoying themselves, some of the wicked men of the city surrounded the house, pounding on the door. They shouted to the old man who owned the house, "Bring out the man who came to your house so we can have sex with him." The owner of the house went outside and said to them, "No, my friends, don't be so vile. Since this man is my guest, don't do this outrageous thing. Look, here is my virgin daughter and his concubine. I will bring them out to you now, and you can use them and do to them whatever you wish, but as for this man, don't do such an outrageous thing." But the men would not listen to him. So the man took his concubine and sent her outside to them, and they raped her and abused her throughout the night, and at dawn they let her go. At daybreak, the woman went back to the house where her master was staying, fell down at the door, and lay there until daylight. When her master got up in the morning and opened the door of the house and stepped out to continue on his way, there lay his concubine, fallen in the doorway of the house, with her hands on the threshold. He said to her, "Get up, let's go." But there was no answer, and the man put her on his donkey and set out for home. When he reached home, he took a knife and cut up his concubine limb by limb into 12 parts and sent them into all the areas of Israel. Everyone who saw it was saying to one another, "Such a thing has never been seen or done, not since the day the Israelites came up out of Egypt. Just imagine, we must do something, so speak up." That was some Sodom and Gomorrah stuff right there. You get the reference, you know what I'm talking about. Then all Israel from Dan to Beersheba and from the land of Galilee came together as one and assembled before the Lord in Mizpah. The leaders of all the people of the tribes of Israel took their places in the assembly of God's people, 400,000 men armed with swords. The Benjamites heard that the Israelites had gone up to Mizpah, and the Israelites said, "Tell us how this awful thing happened." So the Levite, the husband of the murdered woman, said, I and my concubine came to Gibeah in Benjamin to spend the night. During the night, the men of Gibeah came after me and surrounded my house, intending to kill me. They raped my concubine, and she died. I took my concubine, cut into pieces, and sent one piece to each region of Israel's inheritance, because they committed this lewd and outrageous act in Israel. Now, all you Israelites, speak up and tell me what you have decided to do. All the men rose up together as one, saying, None of us will go home. No, not one of us will return to his house. But now this is what we will do to Gibeah. We'll go up against it in order decided by casting lots. We'll take 10 men out of every 100 from all the tribes of Israel, and 100 from 1,000, and 1,000 from 10,000 to get provisions for the army. Then, when the army arrives at Gibeah and Benjamin, it can give them what they deserve for this outrageous act done in Israel. So all the Israelites got together and united as one against the city. The tribes of Israel sent messengers throughout the tribe of Benjamin, saying, What about this awful crime that was committed among you? Now turn those wicked men of Gibeah over to us, so that we may put them to death and purge the evil from Israel. But the Benjamites would not listen to their fellow Israelites. From their towns they came together at Gibeah to fight against the Israelites. At once the Benjamites mobilized 26,000 swordsmen from their towns, in addition to 700 able young men from those living in Gibeah. Among all these soldiers there were 700 select troops who were left-handed, each of whom could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. Israel, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 swordsmen, all of them fit for battle. The Israelites went up to Bethel and inquired of God. They said, Who of us is to go up first to fight against the Benjamites? The Lord replied, Judah shall go first. The next morning the Israelites got up and pitched camp near Gibeah. The Israelites went out to fight the Benjamites and took up battle positions against them at Gibeah. The Benjamites came out of Gibeah and cut down 22,000 Israelites on the battlefield that day, but the Israelites encouraged one another and again took up their positions where they had stationed themselves at the first day. The Israelites went up and wept before the Lord until evening, and they inquired of the Lord. They said, Shall we go up again to fight against the Benjamites, our fellow Israelites? The Lord answered, Go up against them. Then the Israelites drew near to Benjamin the second day. This time, I got hiccups now. This time when the Benjamites came out from Gibeah to oppose them, they cut down another 18,000 Israelites, all of them armed with swords. Then all the Israelites, the whole army, went up to Bethel, and there they sat weeping before the Lord. They fasted that day until evening and presented burnt offerings and fellowship offerings to the Lord. And the Israelites inquired of the Lord. In those days the ark of the covenant of God was there with Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, ministering before it. They asked, Shall we go up again to fight against the Benjamites, our fellow Israelites, or not? The Lord responded, Go, for tomorrow I will give them into your hands. Then Israel sat in ambush against Gibeah. There they went up against the Benjamites on the third day, and took up positions against Gibeah as they had done before. The Benjamites came out to meet them and were drawn away from the city. They began to inflict casualties on the Israelites as before, so that about 30 men fell in the open field and on the roads, the one leading to Bethel and the other to Gibeah. While the Benjamites were saying, We are defeating them as before, the Israelites were saying, Let's retreat and draw them away from the city to the roads. All the men of Israel moved from the places and took up positions at Baal Tamar, and the Israelite ambush charged out of its place on the west of Gibeah. And 10,000 of Israel's able young men made a frontal attack on Gibeah. The fighting was so heavy that the Benjamites did not realize how near disaster was. The Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel, and on that day the Israelites struck down 25,100 Benjamites, all armed with swords. Then the Benjamites saw that they were beaten. Now the men of Israel had given way before Benjamin, because they relied on the ambush they had set near Gibeah. Those who had been in ambush made a sudden dash into Gibeah, spread out, and put the whole city to the sword. The Israelites had arranged with the ambush that they should send up a great cloud of smoke from the city, and then the Israelites would counterattack. The Benjamites had begun to inflict casualties on the Israelites, about 30, and they said, We are defeating them as in the first battle. But when the column of smoke began to rise from the city, the Benjamites turned and saw the whole city going up in smoke. Then the Israelites counterattacked, and the Benjamites were terrified, because they realized that disaster had come on them. So they fled before the Israelites in the direction of the wilderness, but they could not escape the battle. and the Israelites who came out of the towns cut them down there. They surrounded the Benjamites, chased them, and easily overran them in the vicinity of Gibeah on the east. 18,000 Benjamites fell, all of them valiant fighters, as they turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon. The Israelites cut down 5,000 men along the roads. They kept pressing after the Benjamites as far as Gidom and struck down 2,000 more. On that day, 25,000 Benjamite swordsmen fell, all of them valiant fighters, but 600 of them turned and fled into the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, where they stayed 4 months. The men of Israel went back to Benjamin and put all the towns to the sword, including the animals and everything else they found. All the towns they came across they set on fire. Excuse me. The men of Israel had taken an oath at Mizpah. Not one of us will give his daughter in marriage to a Benjamite. The people went to Bethel, where they sat before God until evening, raising their voices and weeping bitterly. Lord God of Israel, they cried, why has this happened to Israel? Why should one tribe be missing from Israel today? Early the next day, the people built an altar and presented burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then the Israelites asked, who from all the tribes of Israel has failed to assemble before the Lord? For they had taken a solemn oath that anyone who failed to assemble before the Lord at Mizpah was to be put to death. Now the Israelites grieved for the tribe of Benjamin and their fellow Israelites. Today one tribe is cut off from Israel, they said. How can we provide wives for those who are left, since we have taken an oath by the Lord not to give them any of our daughters in marriage? Then they asked, which one of the tribes of Israel failed to assemble before the Lord at Mizpah? They discovered that no one from Jabesh Gilead had come to the camp for the assembly. But when they counted the people, they found that none of the people of Jabesh Gilead was there. So the assembly sent 12,000 fighting men with instructions to go to Jabesh Gilead and put to the sword those living there, including the women and children. This is what you are to do, they said. Kill every male and every woman. Kill every male and every woman who is not a virgin. They found among the people living in Jabesh Gilead 400 young women who had never slept with a man, and they took them to the camp at Shiloh in Canaan. Then the whole assembly sent an offer of peace to the Benjamites at the rock of Rimmon. So the Benjamites returned at that time and were given the women of Jabesh Gilead who had been spared, but there were not enough for all of them. The people grieved for Benjamin, because the Lord had made a gap in the tribes of Israel. And the elders of the assembly said, with the women of Benjamin destroyed, how shall we provide wives for the men who are left? The Benjamite survivors must have heirs, they said, so that a tribe of Israel would not be wiped out. We can't give them our daughters as wives, since we Israelites have taken this oath. Cursed be anyone who gives a wife to a Benjamite. But look, there is the annual festival of the Lord in Shiloh, which lies north of Bethel, east of the road that goes from Bethel to Shechem, in the south of Lebanon. So they instructed the Benjamites, saying, go and hide in the vineyards and watch. When the young women of Shiloh come out to join in the dancing, rush from the vineyards, and each of you seize one of them to be your wife. Then return to the land of Benjamin. When their fathers or brothers complain to us, we will say to them, do us the favor of helping them, because we did not get wives for them during the war. You will not be guilty of breaking the oath, because you did not give your daughters to them. So that is what the Benjamites did. While the young women were dancing, each man caught one and carried her off to be his wife. Then they returned to their inheritance and rebuilt the towns and settled in them. At that time, the Israelites left that place and went home to their tribes and clans, each to his own inheritance. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. That's how Judges ends. So we are now done with Judges. We got through that quite quickly. It's a good book. So, Samson, obviously, most interesting part of it, obviously, but verse 11 of chapter 15, which says, then 3,000 men from Judah went down to the cave in the rock of Etam and said to Samson, don't you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us? What have you done to us? He answered, I merely did to them what they did to me. Samson's reply here tells the story of this chapter. I merely did to them what they did to me is practically revenge. Revenge is an uncontrollable monster. Each act of retaliation brings another. It is a boomerang that cannot be thrown without cost to the thrower. The revenge cycle can be halted only by forgiveness. Verse 14 to 17 says, as he approached Lehi, the Philistines came toward him, shouting, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. The ropes on his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hands. Finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. Then Samson said, with a donkey jawbone I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone I have killed 1,000 men. When he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone, and the place was called Ramath Lehi. The Lord's strength came upon Samson, but he was proud and boasted only of his strength. With a donkey's jawbone I have killed 1,000 men, he said, and later and asked God to refresh him because of his accomplishments. Pride can cause us to take credit for what we've done only because of God's strength. Verse 18 says, because he was very thirsty, he cried out to the Lord, you have given your servant this great victory. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? Samson was physically and emotionally exhausted. After a great personal victory, his attitude declined quickly into self-pity. Must I now die of thirst? Emotionally, we are most vulnerable after a great effort or when faced with real physical needs. Severe depression often follows great achievements, so don't be surprised if you feel drained after a personal victory. During these times of vulnerability, avoid the temptation to think that God owes you for your efforts. It was his strength that gave you victory. Concentrate on keeping your attitudes, actions, and words focused on God instead of yourself. Verse 20 says, Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. Apparently, Samson was appointed judge after this victory of the Philistines. Verse 3 says of chapter 16, but Samson lay there only until the middle of the night. Then he got up and took hold of the doors of the city gate together with the 2 posts and tore them loose, bar and all. He lifted them to his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. Samson was set apart for special service to God from birth, but for the most part he ignored his vow to devotion and depended more and more on his own strength rather than on God's. For the first time here, the Spirit of the Lord is not mentioned as directly affecting one of Samson's great feats of strength. If we become successful using our God-given gifts, we must not forget who gave us these gifts, skills, and abilities, or the holy purpose that should direct their use. Notice what happened when Samson forgot about this. When we must always remember that all our gifts and abilities come from God. Verse 5 says, the rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, see if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him so we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver. So, the Philistines were ruled by 5 rulers, not just one. Each ruler had authority over a different city: Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron, Gath, or Gaza. These cities were important trade and commerce centers. Given Delilah's character, it is little wonder that she betrayed Samson when these rich and powerful men paid her a personal visit and offered her a significant sum of money. Verses 15 to 17 says, then she said to him, how can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you have made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength. With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was so sick of it, until he was sick to death of it. So he told her everything. No razor has ever been used on my head, he said, because I have been a Nazarite, dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head was shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man. Samson was deceived because he was naive to Delilah's real motives and asking about the source of his strength. Although he could strangle a lion, he could not see Delilah for who she really was or discern the plan she was working against him. How can you keep your desire for love and companionship from deceiving you? You must decide what kind of person you will love before passion takes over. Determine whether a person's character and faith in God are as desirable as his or her physical appearance. Because most of the time you spend with your spouse will not involve sex. It will not. Your companion's personality, temperament, and commitment to solve problems must be as gratifying as his or her kisses. Be patient. Time and observation often reveal what is beneath a pleasant appearance and attractive touch. Delilah kept asking Samson for the secret of his strength until he finally grew tired of hearing her nagging and gave in. This was the 2nd time that Samson allowed himself to be worn down by constant nagging. What a pitiful excuse for disobedience. Don't allow anyone, no matter how attractive, persuasive, or persistent, to talk you into doing wrong. Verse 19 says, after putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Delilah was a deceitful woman with honey on her lips and poison in her heart. Cold and calculating, she toyed with Samson, pretending to love him while looking for personal gain. How could Samson be so foolish? 4 times Delilah took advantage of him. If he didn't realize what was happening after the first or second experience, surely he should have understood the situation by the 4th time. We think Samson's behavior is foolish, but how many times do we find ourselves deceived by flattery and thus give into temptation of wrong beliefs? Avoid falling prey to deceit by asking God to help you distinguish between deception and truth. Verse 21 says, then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza, binding him with bronze shackles. They sent him to grinding grain in the prison. Samson, the mighty warrior, became a slave. Rather than killing him, the Philistines preferred to humiliate him by gouging out his eyes and making him grind grain. Samson now had plenty of time to wonder if Delilah's charms were worth spending the rest of his life in pain and humiliation. Although God did not completely abandon Samson, he allowed Samson's sinful impulses and decisions to stand, and the consequences of his decisions followed naturally. We may choose to be close to God or to go our own way, but our choices have consequences. Samson didn't choose to be captured, but he chose to be with Delilah. He could not escape the consequences of his decision. Still has the coughs. Blinded and without strength, Samson was taken to Gaza, where he would spend the rest of his short life. Gaza was one of the 5 capital cities of the Philistines, known for its many wells. Gaza was a vital stop along a great caravan route that connected Egypt to the south with Aram. To the north, the Philistines probably showed off their prized captive, Samson, to many dignitaries passing through. Ironically, it was in Gaza that Samson had early demonstrated his great strength by uprooting the city gates. Now he was an example of weakness. Verse 23 and 24 says, now the rulers of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to celebrate, saying, our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands. When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, our God has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste our land and multiplied our slain. Dagon was the chief god of the Philistines, possibly the god of grain and harvest. Many temples were built to Dagon, and the worship there included human sacrifice. The temples were also the local entertainment centers. Just as people today crowd into theaters, Philistine townspeople crowded into the local temple. They sat on the flat temple roof and looked into the courtyard below. What they often saw was the torture and humiliation of prisoners. Since the Philistines had control over the Israelites, they thought their God was stronger. But years later, when the Ark of God was placed before Dagon in a similar temple, the idol fell over and broke into pieces. God's strength goes beyond numbers, physical might, and every other false source of security. Verse 28 through 30 says, then Samson prayed to the Lord, sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more, and let me, with one blow, get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Then Samson reached toward the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood, bracing himself against them, his Philistines, his right hand on the one and his left hand on the other. Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. And he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. So, in spite of Samson's past, God still answered his prayer and destroyed the pagan temple worshippers. God still loved him. He was willing to hear Samson's prayer of confession and repentance and used him this final time. One of the effects of our sin in our lives is to keep us from feeling like prayer. But being perfect is not a condition for prayer. Don't let guilty feelings over sin keep you from your only means of restoration. No matter how long you have been away from God, He is ready to hear from you and restore you to a right relationship with Him. Every situation can be salvaged if you are willing to turn again to God. If God could still work in Samson's situation, He can certainly make something worthwhile out of yours. verse 1 through 3 of chapter 17 says, Now a man named Micah from the hill country of Ephraim said to his mother, The 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you, and about which I heard you utter a curse, I have that silver with me. I took it. Then his mother said, The Lord bless you, my son. When he returned this 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother, she said, I solemnly consecrate my silver to the Lord for my son to make an image overlaid with silver. I will give it back to you. Micah and his mother seem to have good intentions and may have sincerely desired to worship God, but they disobeyed God by following their own desires instead of doing what God wanted. The attitude that prevailed in Micah's day was this: everyone did as they saw fit. This is remarkably similar to the attitude we often see prevailing today, but God has given us standards. He has not left our conduct up to us and our opinions. We can avoid conforming to worldly standards by taking God's word seriously and applying them to life. Independence and self-reliance are positive traits, but only within the framework of God's standards. Verse 4 through 5 says, So after he returned the silver to his mother, she took 200 shekels of silver and gave them to a silversmith, who used them to make the idol, and it was put in Micah's house. Now this man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and some household gods, and installed one of his sons as his priest. Micah may have felt religious because of his initial confession of sin to his mother, the way he instituted practices to worship the idols he made, and the appointment of his son as a priest. He obviously wanted to maintain a religious influence in his home, but he went about it the wrong way. His apparently good intentions were not enough. He needed to follow God's laws and not his own ideas of what was right. If Micah truly loved God, he would have desired to know what God had communicated to his people and what he should do about it. Instead, Micah set up his own religious system for his own benefit. Don't think sincerity and good intentions are enough. You may be in danger of thinking that you need no instruction from God's word or anything else. Verse 6 says, In those days Israel had no king, everyone did as they saw fit. Today, as in Micah's day, everyone seems to put his or her own interest first. This time has not changed human nature. Most people still reject God's way of living. The people in Micah's time replaced the true worship of God with a homemade version of worship. Gideon made a similar mistake. As a result of Gideon's sin, justice was soon replaced by revenge and chaos. Ignoring God's direction led to confusion and whatever seemed right to them at the time. God's direction led to confusion and destruction. Anyone who has not submitted to God will end up doing whatever seems right to them at the time. This tendency is present in all of us. To know what is really right and to have the strength to do it, we need to draw closer to God and his word. Verses 7 to 12. A young Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, who had been living within the clan of Judah, left that town in search of some other place to stay. On his way, he came to Micah's house in the hill country of Ephraim. Micah asked him, Where are you from? I'm a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, he said, and I am looking for a place to stay. Then Micah said to him, Live with me and be my father and priest, and I'll give you 10 shekels of silver a year, your clothes and your food. So the Levite agreed to live with him, and the young man became like one of his sons to him. Then Micah installed the Levite, and the young man became his priest and lived in his house. Apparently, the Israelites no longer supported the priests and Levites with their tithes because so many of the people no longer worshiped God. The young Levite in this story probably left his home in Bethlehem because the money he received through gifts from the people was not enough to live on. But Israel's moral decay affected even the priests and Levites. This man accepted money, idols, and position in a way inconsistent with God's laws. While Micah revealed the religious downfall of individual Israelites, this priest illustrated the religious downfall of the entire community of priests and Levites. So chapter 18, we see the Danites settle in Laish, and they go to, all this weird, crazy stuff happens, and Benjamites get a little crazy as well. Oh, they go to, wait, I'm thinking of the next chapter. A lot of crazy stuff just happens, alright? So, let's just kind of sum it up. The Danites had been assigned enough land to meet their needs. However, because they had failed to trust God to help them conquer their territory, the Amorites had forced them into the hill country and wouldn't let them settle in the plains. Rather than fight for their allotted territory, they preferred to look for new land in the north where resistance from the enemy wouldn't be so tough. It was while they were traveling north that some of their men passed Micah's home and stole some of his idols. Verse 4 through 6 says, he told them what Micah had done for him and said, he has hired me and I am his priest. Then they said to him, please inquire of God to learn whether our journey will be successful. The priest answered them, go in peace, your journey has the Lord's approval. Priests and their assistants were all members of the tribe of Levi. They were to serve the people, teach them how to worship God, and perform the rituals involved in the worship services both at the tabernacle in Shiloh and in the designated cities throughout this land. But this disobedient priest showed disrespect for God in at least 3 ways. He performed his duties in a house. Priestly duties were to be performed only in the tabernacle or a designated city. This requirement was intended to prevent God's laws from being changed. He carried idols with him. He claimed to speak for God when he had not inquired of God and God had not spoken through him. Verse 11 through 26 is this crazy incident. No one desired to worship God. Instead, they wanted to use God for selfish gain. Today, some people go to the church to feel better, be accepted, be relieved of guilt, or gain business contacts or friends. Following God with an attitude or selfish gain rather than selfless service is just as sinful as not following God at all. What? It's better to be cold than even lukewarm. Have you ever heard of that? It's in Revelations. Verse 14 says, then the 5 men who had spied out the land of Laish said to their fellow Danites, you know that one of these houses has an ephod, some household gods, and an image overlaid with silver. Now you know what to do. An ephod was a ceremonial vest worn by a priest. We've gone over this, but okay. Sum it up. Pretty much the incident. Danites came by, saw Micah's house, took his household gods, began to leave. But then Micah and his stirred up the people, and they also took his priests as well. Micah was like, come on, man, why the heck do you do that? And the Danites were like, hey, try me, bro, and we'll kill you and your family. And so Micah just left them alone, and they took everything. But you get for having idols, Micah. Verse 24 says, he replied, you took the gods I made and my priests and went away. What else do I have? How can you ask, what's the matter with you? Micah made idols and hired a priest to run his household religion. When the men of Dan took his idols and priests, nothing remained. What an empty spiritual condition. An idol is anything that takes God's place in a person's life.
Hey, Mom, you wanna go marshmallows with me?
What?
Because that actually wants to.
Roast marshmallows? Let me get them in this video when we can, alright?
Okay.
Elle. Door. Door. An idol is anything that takes God's place in a person's life. Some people invest all their energy in the pursuit of money, success, positions, or a career. If these idols are taken away, only an empty shell of life is left. The only way to protect yourself against such loss is to invest your life in the living God whom you can never lose. Verse 27 says, then they took what Micah had made and his priests and went on to Laish against a people at peace and secure. They attacked them with the sword and burned down their city. Did the tribe of Dan have the right to kill the citizens of Laish? No. God had commanded Israel to clean out and destroy certain cities because of their idolatry and wickedness, but Laish did not fall under that judgment. It was not within the assigned boundaries of Dan, and its people were peaceful in contrast to the warlike Canaanites. But the tribe of Dan had no regard for God's law. God's law said to destroy a city for idolatry. The Danites themselves were guilty of this sin. The story shows how far some of the tribes had wandered away from God. Just because the Danites successfully defeated Laish doesn't mean their actions were right. Their idolatry showed that God was not guiding them. Today, many justify their wrong actions by outward signs of success. They think that wealth, popularity, or lack of suffering is an indication of God's blessing. But many stories in the Bible indicate that evil and earthly success can go hand in hand. Success doesn't indicate God's approval. Don't use your personal success or lack thereof as a measuring rod for whether you are pleasing God. Verse 30 through 31 says, then the Danites set up for themselves the idol, and Jonathan, son of Gershom, the son of Moses, and his sons were priests for the tribe of Dan until the time of the captivity of the land. They continued to use the idol Micah had made all the time the house of God was in Shiloh. The tribe of Dan had stolen Micah's idol, and now they set them up in Laish. Although the Danites were actually denying God by worshiping these images, they probably assumed they were worshiping God through them. Worshipping images of God is not worshiping God, even if it resembles true worship in some ways. People repeat the same mistake today when they claim to be Christians without believing in God's power of changing their conduct to conform to his expectations. godliness cannot be merely a claim. It must be a reality in our motives and in our actions. Shiloh was probably destroyed during the events reported in 1 Samuel chapter 4 and 5, not long after the time described here, because Shiloh was a religious center for Israel. All adult males were required to travel there for certain religious feasts. The tribe of Dan, however, set up idols and priests in the new territory they conquered. The fact that they were over 80 miles away from Shiloh may have been their excuse for not fulfilling the law's requirements. This act was a further demonstration of their disregard for God. The true worship of God should have been maintained by the Levitical priests scattered throughout the land and the influence of the tabernacle in Shiloh. This story shows how idolatrous influences and sinfulness had crept into every corner of Israelite culture. Although 300 years had passed since they had entered the Promised Land, they still had not destroyed the idolatry and evil practices within it. When we allow seemingly harmless habits to have their own small corners in our lives, they can soon become dominating forces that rule us. The ungodly values, attitudes, and practices you have adopted from the world around you can be exposed by applying the light of God's truth to them. Once you see them for what they are, you can begin to uproot them. Chapters 19 to 21 is a very significant, it's a tragic story, but the significance of it, what is it? When the Israelites' faith in God disintegrated, their unity as a nation also disintegrated. They could have taken complete possession of the land if they had obeyed God and trusted Him to keep His promises, but when they forgot Him, they lost their purpose, and soon everyone did as they saw fit. When they stopped letting God lead them, they become no better than the evil people around them. When they made laws for their own benefit, they set standards far below God's. When you leave God out of your life, you may be shocked at what you are capable of doing. Verse 1 of chapter 19 says, "In those days Israel had no king. Now a Levite who lived in a remote area in the hill country of Ephraim took a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah." Having concubines was an accepted part of Israelite society, although this is not what God intended. And a concubine had most of the duties, but only some of the privileges of a wife. Although she was legally attached to one man, she and her children usually did not have the inheritance rights or of the legal wife and legitimate children. Her primary purpose was giving the man sexual pleasure, bearing additional children, and contributing more help to the household or estate. Concubines were often foreign prisoners of war, but they could also be Israelites, as was probably the case in this story. Verse 24 says, Look, here's my virgin daughter and his concubine. I will bring them out to you now, and you can use them and do to them whatever you wish. But as for this man, don't do such an outrageous thing. Nowhere is the unwritten law of hospitality stronger than in the Middle East. Even in ancient times, protecting a guest at any cost ranked at the top of a person's code of honor. But here the hospitality code was gravely misapplied. Allowing the rape and abuse of this woman had become preferable to even the possibility of a conflict between a guest and a neighbor. The two men were selfish, not wanting to get hurt themselves. They lacked courage, not wanting to face a conflict even when lives were at stake, and they disobeyed God's law, allowing deliberate abuse and murder. What drastic consequences can result when social protocol carries more authority than moral convictions? Verses 29 through 30 says, "When he reached home, he took a knife and cut up his concubine limb by limb into 12 parts and sent them into all the areas of Israel. Everyone who saw it was saying to one another, 'Such a thing has never been seen or done, not since the day the Israelites came up out of Egypt. Just imagine, we must do something, so speak up.'" Coughing today. Wow. Although this was a terrible way to spread the news, it effectively communicated the horror of the crime and called the people to action. Saul used a similar method in 1 Samuel chapter 11, verse 7. Ironically, the Levite who alerted Israel to the murder of his concubine was nearly as guilty for her death as the men who had actually killed her. The horrible crime described in this chapter wasn't Israel's worst offense. Even worse was the nation's failure to establish a government based upon God's moral principles, where the law of God was the law of the land. As a result, laws were usually not enforced and crime was ignored. Sexual perversion, murder, and lawlessness were byproducts of Israel's disobedience to God. Whenever we abandon God and His Word, all sorts of evil will likely follow. Our drifting away from God may be slow and almost imperceptible, with the ultimate results affecting a future generation, or it can occur dramatically when we fall to speak up for abused and disenfranchised people. We must continually call people to God and work toward the establishment of God's reign in the heart of every person. The Israelites weren't willing to speak up until events had gone too far. A tragic event woke people up. So people need to speak up today as well. Verse 1, chapter 20 says, Then all Israel from Dan to Beersheba and from the land of Gilead came together as one and assembled before the Lord in Mizpah. Dan was the northernmost city in Israel, and Beersheba was the southernmost. The two were often mentioned together as a reference to the entire region occupied by Israel. Verse 5 says, During the night, the men of Gibeah came after me and surrounded the house, intending to kill me. They raped my concubine, and she died. Reporting the events in Gibeah, the Levite conveniently left out the fact that he had handed over his concubine for the mob to rape. He wanted justice for the threats made against him, but did not place any value on the life of the woman or hold himself responsible for her death. How easy it is to give only partial facts or twist events to remove our own culpability. There we go. When we are seeking to shift blame to someone else. This incident reveals the depths of perversion and violence that develop when a culture abandons God's ways. Verse 13 says, Now turn those wicked men of Gibeah over to us, so that we may put them to death and purge the evil from Israel. Perhaps the Benjamite leaders had given distorted facts about the serious crime in their territory, or perhaps they were too proud to admit that some of the people had stooped so low. Either way, they would not listen to the rest of Israel and hand over the accused criminals. They were more loyal to their own tribe than to God's law. By covering for their relatives, the entire tribe of Benjamin sank to the level of immorality demonstrated by the criminals. Through this act, we get a glimpse of how thoroughly the nation's moral fabric had unraveled. The time period of the judges ends in a bloody civil war that sets the stage for the spiritual renewal to come under Samuel. Verse 27 and 28 says, And the Israelites inquired of the Lord. In those days the ark of the covenant of God was there, with Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, ministering before it. They asked, Shall we go up again to fight against the Benjamites, our fellow Israelites, or not? So, this is the only place in the book of Judges where the Ark of the Covenant is mentioned. This probably indicates how seldom the people consulted God. Phinehas, the high priest, was also the high priest under Joshua. The reference to Phinehas as high priest and the location of the tabernacle in Bethel instead of Shiloh probably indicate that the events of this story occurred during the early years of the Judges. So, should have been placed even before Gideon. And before Ehud and all of them. Maybe not before Ehud. Maybe because that's like right after Othniel. Maybe, who knows? Somewhere between that though. Maybe with Othniel. Who knows? Really far though. Really far in it though. Verse 46 through 48 says, On that day 25,000 Benjamite swordsmen fell, all of them valiant fighters, but 6,100 of them turned and fled into the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, where they stayed 4 months. The men of Israel went back to Benjamin and put all the towns to the sword, including the animals and everything else they found. All the towns they came across they set on fire. The effects of the horrible rape and murder should never have been felt outside the community where the crime had occurred. The local people should have brought the criminals to justice and corrected the laxness that originally permitted to the crime. Instead, first the town and then the entire tribe defended their wickedness, even going to war over it. Many lives were lost unnecessarily. If the crime had been dealt with swiftly and decisively, this disaster could have been averted. To prevent the unresolved problems from turning into major conflicts, take action quickly, wisely, and forcefully before the situation gets out of hand. Verse 48, we already read that, but the tribe of Benjamin eventually recovered from the slaughter. Saul, Israel's first king, was from this tribe, so were Queen Esther and the Apostle Paul. But this tribe was always known for being smaller than the rest. Verse 8 through 12 of chapter 21 says, Then they asked, which one of the tribes of Israel fell to assemble for the Lord at Mizpah? They discovered that no one from Jabesh Gilead had come to the camp for the assembly. But when they counted the people, they found that none of the people of Jabesh Gilead were there. So the assembly sent 12,000 fighting men with instructions to go to Jabesh Gilead and put to the sword those living there, including the women and children. This is what you are to do, they said. Kill every male and every woman who is not a virgin. They found among the people living in Jabesh Gilead 400 young women who had never slept with a man, and they took them to the camp at Shiloh in Canaan. The Israelites moved from one mess to another because of a rash vow made in the heat of emotion. Here they destroyed another town. The Israelites probably justified killing the people and taking the virgins with the following arguments. An oath could not be broken, and they had vowed that everyone who did not help them fight the tribe of Benjamin would be killed. Because all the women from Benjamin had been killed, the few remaining men needed wives to prevent the tribe from disappearing. To spare the unmarried women from Jabesh Gilead seemed to be the right solution. We do not know all the circumstances behind the brutal massacre at Jabesh Gilead, but the rest of Israel seems to have followed Benjamin's pattern. They put tribal loyalties above God's commands, and they justified wrong actions to correct past mistakes. Verse 25 says, in those days Israel had no king, everyone did as they saw fit. During the time of the judges, the people of Israel experienced trouble because they acted on their own opinions of what was right and wrong. This produced horrendous results. Today our world is similar. Individuals, groups, and societies have made themselves the final authority without reference to God. When people selflessly satisfy their personal desires at any cost, everyone pays the price. The ultimate heroic act is to submit all our plans, desires, and motives to God. Men like Gideon, Jephthah, and Samson are known for their heroism in battle, but their personal lives were far from heroic. To be truly heroic, we must go into battle each day in our homes, jobs, churches, and societies to make God's kingdom known and enacted there. Our weapons are the standards, morals, truths, and convictions we receive from God's word. We will lose if we gather the spoils of earthly treasures rather than seeking the treasures of heaven. There we go. That is all of Judges. So, you got time with Judges today, and we'll be doing Ruth. 9 o'clock, I guess. Judges is a good book. I really like it. Top 8 in the Old Testament for me. So thank you for watching. I am going to say prayer now. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Lord, I think that was weak. There you go. Lord, I thank you for gathering us here today. I ask, and I thank you for giving us wisdom, understanding, Lord. I ask that this teaching can give us obedience, Lord. I ask that you can give us strength like Samson to overcome our sin, Lord. And spiritual strength is what I'm talking about, Lord. I ask that you can provide in our lives, Lord. I ask that you can prevent us from doing our evils in our life, Lord, and prevent us from doing our wrongs, Lord. I ask that you can keep us straying away from sin and keep us getting closer to you, Lord. I ask that you put the fruits of the Spirit upon us and keep away the fruits and evils of the flesh away from us. Keep those away, Lord. I thank you for keeping them away. I thank you for protecting us. I thank you for giving us wisdom and understanding so we can shun evil and stand in awe of you, Lord. And if anyone doesn't have you, I pray they can find you, Lord. And if they already do have you, I ask that they can continue to pursue you, Lord, going out and carrying out your will as well so other people can pursue you as well. I thank you, and I pray all these things in your name. Amen. Good night. God bless. Love y'all.